Дорогие друзья, всех очень рады.
Dear friends, we are very happy to see all of you here at Moscow Finance Forum. It is quite an interesting meeting with a quite interesting format, and this is a large assembly, and we invited here professionals that have known each other for a very long time, and they certainly are well versed in the subject we're going to discuss today. The objective of this session is to discuss the measures of the state support, but not as an abstract notion or a system of measures that are offered by the state. Rather, we would like to have quite a candid talk today and see how we, as a state, as a financial sector, are moving in the same direction when we define state support in this or the other way. For us, it is not a goal per se, and the Ministry of Finance is known for being quite thrifty, and for us, it is important to understand whether the budget we allocate or the tax expenses are used in the most efficient way. For the society and for the budget as a whole, we also understand that under current circumstances, it is impossible to talk about efficient economical development without large-scale investment projects. We understand that we cannot solely depend on the public finances allocated, because the pace of economic growth our president would like to see, and that are reflected in all government documents. Well, the scale of them is so high that we have to focus on the private funds of private investors. And over the past year, we have reached considerable results with the companies whose representatives are present here. We are talking about the representatives of entrepreneurship community, and with some of you, we have established a good dialogue, and we know that with some companies the investments have increased. And for us, it is important to understand what we need to do in order to be consistent, in order to fulfill our obligations, and in order for you to feel excited about being engaged in this or other projects. So here we have a club of financial executives, and we are thankful to the Agency of Strategic Initiatives for offering this format, and it is an extended one today. And thank you for holding this discussion, because we would like to hear from the businesses, from the financial investment community, from our partners representing various industries. And we are primarily focused on an agricultural sector that offers a lot of opportunities and has great potential. We know about the promising results demonstrated in the Far Eastern regions. We have made some errors from which we learned lessons, and now we are able to offer some systematic measures. We also would like to discuss with you the investment policy, and here we have basically the true community that represents our economy at large. So, Helen, please help me. And where should we start this exciting dialogue? And let us think what we need to do in order to hear the voices of those for who we extend our support, because state support is not given for the sake of the support. Well, similar what we did with young policies. We discussed with the young people what they need, and as a result, we found out that we were thinking in a different way. Thank you for referring to us as young people. We are still pleased to be referred to as young people. I suggest that the microphone is passed to everyone who has anything to say, and please talk briefly. The goal is clear. Another thing is to make sure that we hear you, that we are on the right track, that our roadmaps, our projects are relevant for you. Because sometimes we are under the impression that we misinterpret your standpoints, and in terms of objectives, we have consensus. In terms of choosing a route towards the objective, we are not sure that we are on the right track. So let us talk, let us have an argument, let us have a good, viable discussion in this free manner. Who would like to grab the microphone? Sergey Yurovich, Irkutsk Oil Company, Sergey Donskoy. First of all, I would like to start with the words of thanks. When we started our interaction, our active interaction with the government, with Dmitry Kozak, with the Ministry of Finance, basically with all the stakeholders, we initially got a great deal of support. It was very viable support, and it was very positive, even despite my background. When my counterparts heard that Irkutsk Oil Company, and we are talking about a large chemical production facility that we are constructing in the Republic of Yakutia, and of course that implies lack of infrastructure, lack of social services available for people, and we are planning to bring to the site over 3,000 people together with their families, and that would be an additional number. So this is a large-scale project with a volume of investment equal to 500 billion rubles, and we had to construct it as we promised, and it has to be commissioned by 2024 based on the decree of the president. We are talking about national project. Yes, it is an expert national project. It is part of this project, and we intend to implement Japanese technologies, and these are eco-friendly technologies that can be implemented here. So all together requires a considerable support, and we received it initially. Very good, but what do we do wrong? Let me go step by step. We had a very good meeting with the Minister of Finance, with the first vice chair of the government, and we knew what we had to do by spring this year. We had a list of an action plan, so we had objectives when it comes to infrastructure, a tax system, a social sphere, etc., etc. A question to you, Sergey. The question that is of concern to a government official: as for the state support, can it and should it be individual, or it should be universal? If the state support was universal, would your project fit in the structure? And do you need certain tax related solutions, and is the support you enjoyed was individual, or you fit in the system available? Well, of course, we are talking about individual support, because in order to create infrastructure, you are talking about a particular region. There are roads, but the road infrastructure is insufficient for the project of this scale, and you have to build railroad stations. So again, it was an individual support. It's not good because we would like to invent a comprehensive tool or comprehensive formula. Thank God I've been dealing with federal projects for a long time, and I can tell you, you cannot come up with a universal solution. As of 1995, I was engaged in large projects at the level of ministries, and of course there is a universal component, it's true. But if we talk about large projects at some remote areas where there is no infrastructure, and additionally you need to introduce new technologies associated with certain risks, you need certain tools to make it up and running. So there has to be a pilot project that can be extrapolated across projects. Well, once you have tools, you might then use them for other large projects. But in any case, when we are talking about projects first of the kind, you have to realize them on an individual basis. When we started Sakhalin projects in 1990s, the government had to work individually on each project. It was case-by-case approach, and then you can criticize it, but everyone knows of Sakhalin, and Sakhalin became a leading project in the Far East. How about support measures? In order to launch large projects, you need to exercise an individual approach. Once you upscale this projects, you can use some universal rules, but for testing the tools, you have to work on an individual basis. Exactly. Well, today, the idea that we have in the industrial sector is very popular, and I would like to hear your name, Irina. And by the way, thank you, Sergey Yefimovich, for your comments. We have changed the state approach to developing industrial projects. We have changed the concept, and we are not using here the word export in order not to initiate some wrong relations with businesses, but we actually initiated a contest-based selection without analyzing the quality of proposal on the part of the business. We said that for us it is sufficient to take a look at your competitive programs. You file them with us, and we form rating based on these programs, and then we select 80% of the best proposals. So we have quotes for chemistry, for physics, for mineral, fertilizers, and some other industries. And these decisions are made in a number of industries, including automobile industry, and that has to do with raising and keeping the employment level in some industries, first of all, automobile ones. So when we talk about the large projects, they account for 70% from overall number of projects and direct investments in the country. And for us as a state, it's interesting to work with federal projects because it will provide the utmost impact on the country's economy, and also will increase increase the employment level in the regions. So it's important to understand what is the efficiency of the government of this state support, because we need to understand what the goal is. The goal is not to lose trust, because when it comes to your relations with business, you can build your relations for years and you can ruin them in one day. As for new projects, they have to go through tenders, and but as for our old friends. We keep relations with them and continue working together. Thank you very much for giving hope that these discussions will then be converted into real results. My name is Matveyeva Elena, and I represent the gas group. As for automobile industry, it certainly receives state support and support of the Ministry of Finance. We analyzed many programs and we developed the tools of support on the part of the government and on the part of the Ministry of Finance. Of course, automobile industry has never been deprived of the state support. Now we are creating a new investment mode, and for us succession matters, succession and coherency of decisions, especially when it comes to setting goals, because some important goals were solved successfully by the industry itself. So we used the tax benefits, importing spare parts, and that allowed us to come up with a diverse product range and provide a good supply. And we can say that almost all foreign consortiums established their production or assembly lines here, and it's more than sufficient here in Russia. What is important? Important is not to stop the flow of investments in automobile industry, and the state support should support the stream of investments to make sure that it's up and running.
We're talking about localizing, but we have omitted one value. We haven't provided enough reserves in our country. To my surprise, talking about support measures in vehicle industry, we're talking about the needs of change. Is it necessary? Maybe we can change the situation by developing imports, by carrying out various trade operations. But such issue is particularly important, which is discussed by Russian and foreign investments. As for particularly we receive a lot of investments into the car industry. Right now, we really need a new state support instrument. First of all, I'm talking about a framework legislation of economic nature, and secondly, we need to take certain steps. We need to create certain mechanisms for the industry. The result, such support should result into the emergence of new changes, particularly localization of car industry, increasing GDP, and the transfer of added value manufacturing in the country and abroad. So in the investment policy of the state towards the car industry, we need to, first of all, focus our attention on changes and localization. So we needed to regulate relations between the state and investors in such a way that their cooperation would be mutually responsible and mutually beneficial. There are situations where we provide certain competition procedures which are quite simple when there are competitions. But we perfectly understand who produce better vehicles. As for various changes that are being carried out at the moment, but at the same time, we don't call on everyone to avoid taking systemic measures because people are talking about individual approaches, but actually you can systematize everything, you can generalize everything. And the car industry experience shows that you can create a system everywhere. Some mechanisms should be adjusted to specific investors. And as for the industry, the manufacturing, I think that lowered interest rate can tackle the issue. So here we are all hoping we all hope for the changed monetary policy of the Central Bank of Russia. As I can see that you don't agree with the implementation of large products. First, I would like to give the floor to one of our entrepreneurs. Are you going to give the floor to chief financial officers or not? But first you're going to tell us that you don't have any money. We're going to listen to you all. But after that you will say that thank you for your proposals, but we don't have any money. Please hold on and brace yourselves. In terms of Far Eastern projects, the situation is much more difficult because you're developing projects in a remote area of Russia. Such territories don't have developed energy infrastructure or roads, but at the same time, you want to make it territory attractive for export. So in terms of principles and forms of cooperation between business and our government, what can we do to present the results of our meeting? Talking about certain industries and, for example, car industry and agriculture, we have certain results. Just here we need to talk about refinement and improvement there. But as for the transport and energy infrastructure in a remote area of Russia, there are no such plans. Because we have a lot of variants, we have a lot of routes, but we have no navigation. That's the first issue. We need to separate support measures and those industries where we have achieved great results, and we have to pay attention to those industries where we still cannot achieve significant success and significant progress. So first, we need to have a look at the spectrum of industry and to understand, to make the table with all the information about it. We're talking about industries, but here we need to take into account federal and regional aspects and all the developments that take place at these levels. Because we have one of the territories which experiences a lot of difficulties in terms of industrialization and development. The Prime Minister even appointed several people who are in charge of these difficult territories. Medvedev said that Central and Eastern Siberia is a territory that links China and Russia, Asia and Europe, and such territories have scientific and technical potential. Going back to regions, agencies, but also regions are ready to provide their support. Legislation has been developed on that, but taking into account national development goals and the responsibility of regional authorities. So many instruments don't work. So first of all, we need to receive information from you. particularly when you allow certain regions to use certain support measures. For example, mechanism for creating a real support mechanism. Another important aspect why we need such measures. We need such measures like direct financing of the car industry, because here we see different projects developed in the regions. They say, yes, you can develop it, but there is no effect. 5 years later, we see the return of investments, but no results, which is quite difficult. And for investor, the situation is also difficult, because banks can also look at the situation, but they need to have a look at the financial model. So again, we need to pay attention to the regional effects of support mechanisms, but going back to practice, which was quite successful in Krasnoyarsk region. They tell a lot about the positive experience of that region, but in other industries, we need to provide funding for the infrastructure, and such situation depends on the region. The state also should provide its assistance, because we are talking about the model of financial efficiency, but also such support will help the entire country, and such support also demonstrates that the state is directly interested in the implementation of such projects. So again, direct investments are important, particularly investments into infrastructure. Secondly, we need a mechanism of cooperation between businesses and states that will help to use special instruments. And third, we need to provide a universal register of information to make sure if the investor is suitable in terms of the state policy. Thank you. So, do we understand you correctly that we need to find such mechanisms? Sorry, we are financial experts, so we're trying to analyze all the opportunities that we have. Right now, the entire budget is based on the development of national projects. We're talking about the establishment of secure roads. We have a long-term program for Russian railways. And we are particularly thankful to our colleagues for working together on the project. In these national projects, we have determined certain share, a percentage of resources that together could be sent to the investment projects. We're talking about roads, energy, the establishment of energy infrastructure, so that we would have clear principles, we would understand the volume of the project, that such project is carried out in a remote area. If it's a densely populated territory of the country, then it's another story. In the Russian Far East, there is a special fund for the development of the Far East. It's diverse in its infrastructure. And we have the same story in agriculture. 5 or 6 years ago, we have carried out the program of agricultural sustainable development, and we built a lot of agricultural roads. And the representative of the Miratorg holding company can confirm such facts, because we have achieved a lot of greatest results after implementation of that project. So we ask our colleagues to provide their commentary how the situation can be adjusted, but also we kindly ask you to pay attention to the proposals that we've made. It's the certain tasks for addressing certain tasks of the investment projects in terms of funding. And can you tell us if it's possible in distant, remote territories of the country Because as for the capex in mineral reserves, it can be significant, because as a state we can say that we can get back that taxes, but at the same time our colleagues from funding organizations should believe that somehow we will achieve this estimated output. So how did you manage to organize all this work in the Far East? Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to repeat what was mentioned earlier. There is no difference between different approaches, because when you work with investors, you work individually with every one of them. But at the same time, you need to use a universal approach. You should a minimum set of guarantees and preferences when you try to attract investors to one another territory, and after that you start the adjustment process. The practice shows that you can have different sets of preferences, because there is a great difference when you attract investors to the Arctic or when you attract investors to the central federal districts. So you should have a huge set of preferences that will accommodate the needs of investors in one and on another territory. We worked in the Far East for 4 years, and we have investment projects today. And it's a result of preferences that meet the expectations of investors who want to work on that territory. Talking about the infrastructure support, we have today a lot of major projects that are being implemented for 5 years, and such result is explained by the fact that the state subsidizes infrastructure, because, as you know, as for the infrastructure in the Far East, it's a sad story. We started the process in 1953 and we finished it only in 2017. Such project has been carried out for such a long time just because in the Far East there was no infrastructure. That's why the state policy might somehow deter the flow of investments to your country. For 2-3 years ago, we have put forward an initiative, and we enjoyed the support of the Russian Minister of Finance and Mr. Silvanov. We believe that such mechanism will be efficient and successful. It's important to give investors not just mere promises. You need to provide certain obligations. You should have a binding agreement. All risks should be hedged if a state does not fulfill its obligations. And such mechanism, this is how such mechanism works in the Far East, and I hope that it's going to work in the future. What I would like to add, distinguished colleagues, I would like to follow up on the discussions that takes place in the room. I have some personal attitude towards what we're discussing. I still believe that it's a large mistake when you try to create competitions. Actually, in the Russian Federation, I haven't seen a large number of major investors who were able to fight against each other to receive investment opportunities. You don't see such a large group of people. 5 years ago, we followed that logic in the Far East because we support any project, large, medium, small project, it doesn't matter. We are dealing with every project. We have provided the simplified regimes of the free port of Vladivostok and priority development areas. we provide preferences for everyone. If you meet the requirements set out in the Russian legislation and you are ready to inject 5 million rubles to the free port of Vladivostok, then you automatically receive all these preferences. And I still believe that this decision has been quite correct, because we wouldn't have thousands of projects without such rules and provisions.
I believe under current circumstances, when the only chance to boost economic growth is to provide large-scale investments, this gate also should be sufficiently wide. And another thing I'd like to mention, and that is outside the tax-related discussion or tax preferences, that is the approach itself. The state should follow the investors. We are not we are not talking about territory of advanced development, and we provide this mode regime for a particular territory, and we are not working that way. We have obligations, and any investor that comes to Far East automatically is entitled to this benefits related to the priority development area. And the last thing I would like to mention, colleagues, it is very important, and so far it has not been mentioned. Client-oriented approach towards investors is crucial. In the Far East, we have created a set of development institutions aimed at providing free-of-charge services to investors, and these are very different. Various services started from assisting the officers to relocate, providing financial support, etc., etc. And it is sometimes of utmost importance. Another thing is protection of business. A lot is being said about it at the moment. We offer to investors mechanisms that protect investors and their interests. So when today we talk about a universal approach for the entire country, it is very important to take into consideration these protection measures for every investor to feel confident. The agricultural segment is the most sophisticated in terms of government support. Well, you underestimate under the industries, car-making industry alone. Okay, that's your opinion, and I would agree with it. I always learn something new each year. Absolutely. Well, talking about a universal approach and universal support, that they have always been in place. We are a small industry that cannot be compared to all to the industrial sector and subsector, but of course we have our subsectors like cattle farming, plant farming, etc. And we decided not to provide individual support measures to all companies. Maybe unlike industrial sector, we have quite typical business models. If you are in cattle farming, you use pretty much same solution. So if you grow if you have crops, or if you grow crops, it's the same thing. So our players in the market are pretty much the same. They work in different territories, but other than that, there is a lot in common between the market players, and we just had a very lengthy discussion trying to understand that our companies receive sufficient and sufficient and needed support. And I will give you an example. There is an issue in the Republic of Kalmykia. They have a large cattle population, and there are meat processing companies, and nobody would like to enter that area. And yes, they grow cattle, but then it goes elsewhere. The meat products go elsewhere. And in order to make this process more transparent, we agreed with the Republic of Kalmykia of compensating direct costs per head and of cattle, and we will see whether this measure will attract more investors into this area. And we understand that other nearby regions, they also have very strong cattle farming segment, but they're more attractive. So we need to see how we can support Kalmykia region in that regard. So yes, universal approach will stay, but case-by-case approach will be enhanced as a component. Well, I would like to ask our bank sector, and they are ready. It is the conversation between us was always simple. If you want to enter a new project, you need to have a state guarantee, or there should be a status of a project that has state significance. And yes, if you assume the risks, we will finance everything and anything. Thank God this system is not working any longer, and thanks to the colleagues from the bank sector, and here we have our colleagues from Rossельхозbank, Web, VTB, and so on. So we right now are interacting to each other at a scale when we enjoy partnership-based relations, and these relations between businesses, between the government and you, and only relations of this kind are able to increase trust, and we as the Ministry of Finance have less risks when it comes to allocating budget funds, and we also in this case can understand that you trust to investors more, and your financial model offered will be more efficient. And anyway, the level of trust is a lot higher than it used to be even 3 or 4 years ago. So from your point of view, what should we do in order to increase the level of trust, and then we will be able to criticize you with the results of all the inspections that we will take. Well, thank you for giving me the floor. I will divide my comments into 2 parts. So Sergey talked about his large project, and when we talk about an infrastructure component, and we are talking about large multi-billion projects, we offered 20, 30, even 50% of the investment volume. And of course, there are up and running mechanisms for instance, by using tariffs when you work with the national grid companies, or you're using the minimum guaranteed return rate. Well, anyway, these mechanisms are in place. They've been used, and of course, a lot depends on the regional budget, on its deficit or surplus. But I would like to pay your attention to one aspect, that is the social infrastructure. It is not a widely discussed subject, and we understand that there is lack of human resources professionals. When we talk about relocation of 3,000 professionals to the production facility, highly skilled workers, it certainly requires an effort on the part of the investor. An investor can pay any amount, but they might not be able to find this number of professionals ready to relocate, or they might not be prepared for the relocations. And for us, one of the key priorities is to make sure that the human resource at the point the project is commissioned will be ready to go, and there will be a sufficient number of people. So we need to understand where do these people reside, what are the professionals, how will we train them. So you do the calculation per project, absolutely, because the return of investment starts from this, because you need to understand how long it will take to train the employees, how much it will cost to hire foreign experts in order to provide training and to make sure that the production facility will be working efficiently according to its capacity. And sometimes it happened that we would organize a training at a certain university, but then the program would be shut down. So these things have to be taken into account, and we need to think of proper at-site training, and we need to look for professionals that will work at those facilities at close by territories. We also have projects like the project 1044, and somebody was criticizing it heavily. However, I believe it was a good starting point to move on to the factory or for the financing, as I put it. So the reimbursement was provided through tariffs, and the region received additional money, and you see the cost of land plots available for sale the price of land plots went up. So you may have this deferred positive effect as well as instantaneous defect when it comes to or building railroads, something we need to think about. And very often regions, they ignore all these aspects and all the opportunities at hand. And then I would like to talk about the scale of the projects. If 5 or 7 years ago the projects of 30, 50 or 70 billion rubles were large, and we didn't have sufficient experience of implementing such projects when it comes to warranty measures and so on. Now we have already good considerable experience, and when we'll look at some figures, and we understand that we need to help the investor to go through the valley of death. So that is how we refer to investment projects often. We understand that we are talking about amount of 150 billion rubles, and it's hard to put up with such figure. But in order to earn a lot, you need to invest a lot. But this is a point when we need to move on to different reality and to adjust our mentality and focus the regions on such projects. We have lots of financial experts here, and we could focus this dialogue on subsidies and stuff like that, but we would like it to be structured in somewhat different manner. We would like you to hear the voice of entrepreneurs, financial officers that work in the corporate sector who implement serious projects. So the talk that we are having at the moment should give you food for thought, and then would have a positive impact on your financial activities. Well, Alexia, I apologize for interrupting you. I also would like to give the floor to Dmitry or Nikolai. Well, I will say a few words. Yes, the scale goes up and we need curators. When we talk about large projects like Yamal-SPG or the one that you have just mentioned, we can say that the Ministry of Finance assumed the coordinating role. It's very important that the government has a coordinating body in order for the projects to become successful. And also it is important to think of the level of the investments, because the bank has limitations. Even the Bank of even a web bank, and I would think about issuing bonds or maybe engaging such investors and pension fund, and they are lagging behind from our standpoint in terms of the engagement. And we are talking not at the not talking about investment stage, but about other ones. Thank you very much for this proposal, but to think of it, we need to accumulate experience before we start this dialogue. We need to have more than 1 or 2 projects. We need to have a portfolio of projects, and then we can initiate the dialogue and then reach common ground. Yeah, well, in practice, you need to demonstrate the project for the central bank and see what can be done out of it. Well, we are running out of time, but I would like to mention about fly in the ointment. And well, very shortly, we are talking only about proposals, and my colleagues will add, if needed. The budget is ready to invest 13 billion rubles. Exactly, you read my message right. But we are also expecting the investors to invest 26.5 billion. But we understand that investors are not going to offer direct investments. They will resort to bank financing, and so 80% from 35 trillion is equal to 27 trillion rubles that the banks will have to provide. In order to be able to do that, the bank system should have free capital of 3 trillion rubles. Of course, they don't have that amount. In order to stimulate these activities of the state related to supporting strategic projects, we need to support the central bank in his activities related to stimulating regulation. And the projects, the industrial related projects take less capital, but we can say that where we have state support, the capital is around 50%, what will allow the banks to reduce their margin, and then the requirements of the shareholders of the government that requires dividends can be fulfilled thanks to the lower margin. And we always talk about investments to the direct capital, and why don't industrial companies invest, oil companies, metallurgy companies, and so on. It's all about banks. Banks have to be an efficient tool for reallocating of this budgets of these amounts. So how large is your profit from redistributing these allocations? How should we build our policy so that we will strike a fair balance related to distribution of these allocations? Well, colleagues would like to answer. We are paying dividends. I understand you are paying the dividends to the shareholder, but the industrial companies tell us you organize your stimulating regulations in a way when we are at the point of not making loss, but look at the profits the banks enjoy. And I'm just mentioning it because we are going to discuss it, and we are interested in substantial increase of the number of investment projects. For us, it is the key challenge, the key objective, and we are going to do our best in order to fulfill this goal.
I would like to tell you a few details. Am I right? I just would like to say that our bank experts, next time when we're going to hold the meeting of CFO Club, they will say, no, we don't go there, because they will ask us different complicated questions. We're not talking about projects that we're discussing together with you. These are the projects that are not evident economically for the bank, because the bank wants to see the return of investments to the capital. And those projects that we're discussing together with you are not so economically evident. That's why we ask you to provide state guarantees. Talking about the state, there will be projects that won't be quite lucrative. And the projects that we're discussing right now, they don't generate enough profit. But these projects are important for me as a citizen of Russia, and are important for everyone else, every other citizens, because if we deal with any sanctions, we will have to drive dilapidated cars. Because right now we have all the instruments and parts for car industry, because VTB Bank won't take losses from the project. Such project is not lucrative again, but this project is important for the state. Here you need guarantees. So we need to provide incentives for the project, so that such projects are bankable. But such projects are bankable when guarantees are provided by the state, or if stakeholders are actively involved in the process. But we have other projects in other industries where owners have 20 or 30% of the shares. And sometimes owners say that we're going to buy all other shares of the company and we will improve everything. But when we look closely at the situation, we don't see any changes. I think that such events are really important to discuss everything and to find more details. I just remember that one of the ministers saw our discussions on the TV, and he's interested in the verbatim of the meeting. We do not plan to make the verbatim of the meeting, but we're going to publish the video. If you criticize something, make a proposal, and if you propose something, do this. First, don't make projects that are not lucrative. Make projects that are quite competitive. You need to provide capital for projects. And we're thankful to different teams in the Central Bank of Russia, because they listen to us, they understand us. And if we deal with certain limitations, we try to work on it. Another thing we're talking about, the qualification of employees and personnel, and the provision of specialists for projects. And another small remark that I would like to make, as for the staff, experts and specialists involved in projects, quite often I visit Far East, Kamchatka, Magadan. You need to understand that any project, for example, there was one project that was launched recently when they were trying to take 2,000, 3,000 people. Well, thank God they actually needed much less people to work with. The thing is that no one wants to live on these territories because, again, there is no infrastructure there, and it's up to the state to establish the infrastructure. Because people establish kindergartens for themselves. They have to do that for themselves. The state doesn't do that. Well, fortunately, the state supported our initiative, and they want to direct taxes to the establishment of kindergartens and other social infrastructure. So here we need projects, and we are ready to support them. So today we meet with different business officials. No, I think that you work closely together with VEB, Внешэконом Bank, because Внешэконом Bank says to us, give us capital, give us liquidity. Thank you. I understand that I need to speak briefly here, but I would like to add some pleasant details here. At the beginning, you said we have no money, brace yourselves. We hear that such a fact is not true. It's not about money, it's not about liquidity. It's more about smart money and how you can bridge money and lucrative projects. It's very good that we're discussing such things here in an open manner, that our meeting is broadcasted, and we have real mechanisms that work. People are also talking about universal and individual measures, but they are similar because there are some individual features when you have to adjust yourself to certain investors. Because the situation in the car industry and situation in the Far East are totally different, because before developing car industry in the Far East, you need to build roads, and you need special plants and factories for that. So what did I want to say? I represent banks, but VEB is not a bank. It's a national development corporation. VEB tries to facilitate, provides its facilitation and assistance. Firstly, we work with the government that provides its support. We work with the businesses and we work with banks. That's why we act as an important partner. It's not we don't face with any competition, but we just provide our assistance to the projects. Alexei briefly told about the factory that has become a support mechanism. We have approved 7 projects, 4 projects already receive funding. But this factory closes one element. But here we need to talk about the so-called long money. Because the whole situation depends from prices, from long currencies, and here we and our partners, bank partners, we're ready to play our role in the structure, and we believe that our clients that receive funding and our bank partners are beneficiaries in the system. That's just one element. As a chief financial officer, I can say that right now everyone is talking about the investment protection legislation. Today we were discussing tariffs of railways. One of the investors told me that can we first receive your taxes? And I said to the investors that I really like your ideas. Just give me your taxes, and after that I'll pay for everything. It's just a part of truth that we need to build. You received a long-term funding, but you need to eliminate all the risks that projects that you invest in might create. So again, we have these two mechanisms, which is a good thing. We're trying to make our products compatible. We also provide reliable interest rates to our partners, and another part where we actively work is the support of imports replacement program. I think that we have some elements and necessary mechanisms. I would like to pay your attention to the fact that we are working for more than an hour, but a forum provides us opportunities to continue our discussion. But how would you like to finish our work? To finish our discussion, I think that we need to express some ideas about some environmental projects in northern parts of Russia. Is it possible to provide support to such projects so that projects will receive incentives? And I would like to ask Alexei about the tax policy. Is it a fiscal policy, or is it accommodative monetary policy? Because today policy establishes the conduct in the long-term and short-term perspective. Right now we have financial bodies of the country who can see how effectively we implement governmental policies, so they monitor how we implement these policies. Maybe you could tell us if we are moving in the right direction. And there is another serious project that I would like to present with the Transmash holding team. We have some water processing projects and mineral fertilizers projects. We are taking a slow path, but I need to say that the rector of the Skoltech University have given us a lot, has made a great contribution to the country. But at the same time, together we're doing our best to achieve the investment output instructed by our leaders. One of our partners is SPB Bank, has provided us enough funds and helped to stabilize relations between businesses and state. Andrei, you're going to tell everything. Are you also constructing the electrical power plant in Lipinsk? Because, as we know, the plant should have received a special reduced electric tariffs. You have told me everything. I just don't know how to answer that. Just tell me yes or no. We want to start the construction, but we're afraid of any backlogs and malfunctions. We believe that our assistance shouldn't be targeted because everyone should enjoy the support of the state. We could support industries, we can support, because if we support certain industries, if we support certain geographical territories, we are going to deal with extra tariffs and duties imposed against us. Right now we have a project, we have agreed upon it finally, but all we ask is that we are thinking about the second step because we have an agreement, capital agreement. It is an important mechanism that will make its contribution to the implementation of national programs. So we have a request of what instrument will bind everyone to implement these projects on fixing the tariffs. There is such a mechanism which is a binding agreement, and we're ready to fix the tariff within the agreement. And we will develop the tariff formula which will be appropriate for everyone. So we hear you need to do that, and we are ready to support you. And due to the reasons that I've mentioned already, we believe that targeted assistance is not an appropriate policy. Usually companies who say that they don't have money, it means that this company doesn't have strategy. If they have strategy, they will have money. I think that we're going to see you later, and I think that we're going to discuss everything later. I hope that at your residence we're going to conduct another CFO club meeting. But we kindly ask you, if you hold another meeting about financing of investment projects, please invite us to the discussion, because financial experts are really interested in governmental activities. Maybe we could talk with some of your experts from regional treasuries of Russia, just to better understand how you work. Maybe we could use mechanisms that you have developed. Sorry, you are distracting. Thank you for the mic. I will have a look at that through environmental projects. I would like to thank you all for upgrading the level of our dialogue. We're interested in having a dialogue just to give money to the economy of the country. We have just one task. One of the ideas that we have heard in the discussion I focused on the fact that participants were talking about fiscal and budgetary effects of provided support. But we need also to take into account the load that facilities, plans experience. We need also to pay attention to the infrastructure that attracts investors, contractors, attracts people who want to live in these territories. We have to take additional support measures just to find projects that will have a direct fiscal and budget effect. Usually we're talking about environmental projects. We're also trying to fulfill the task to give powers to constituent entities of the Russian Federation. We have talked with our colleagues, and our colleagues said the following. They need powers that will be set out in the federal legislation.
And this is the body that does inspections and verifications, and you see whether they see whether projects are in line with all the regulations and all the legislative acts, and we're going to keep an eye on it while highlighting this issue. Oh, by the way, in Krasnoyarsk region, I think to you, to Lev Vladimirovich, we are right now developing a legislative act, and we will be ready to be engaged. And hopefully in Krasnoyarsk region, Khakassia region, similar acts will be enacted at the same time. And besides environmental projects, social projects, well, let's talk about the taxes. I've first given a question whether we would like to extend universal or individual preferences. We are proponents of universal ones, and therefore we are developing right now the laws that will help businesses to act based on those laws and to increase their presence in these other regions. And right now, as for the taxes, we are discussing right now terms and conditions with the Krasnoyarsk region. And here it is our initiative, and we are conducting the dialogue with the local authorities in order to accelerate the enactment of the laws in this area. But so far it's not there. Okay, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I will probably talk from a defensive standpoint. Yes, we were making sure that you will be one of the last to talk. Well, my position is clear and well known. As for individual support measures as tax arrears, I believe that they should not be provided, and I think everything is clear here. So while we have equal terms and conditions for everyone, there will be a competition of skills and the ideas. But as soon as we switch to individual solutions, it will be a situation of political leverage or political weight. And it's clear that those who have political influence are in the minority, and their sphere of expertise often has nothing to do with investment projects. Therefore, all measures of individual support are doomed to fail because it will not be the best distribution of investment resources. Here we have the representatives of the bank sector, and we believe that they have a high competence when it comes to distributing investment resources compared to the public servants. Therefore, there should not be individual tax-based support. And another thing, rephrasing famous quote, that you get shares in the morning and money in the evening, or vice versa. When we talk about measures of tax benefits, it's like you get investments in the evening and tax benefits then, and the cost of shares or investments should not exceed the tax benefits. So for us it is a principle, and we are using this principle as we make this or that decision. And we are discussing often the stability of tax conditions. While any act can be ruled over by another act, and when it comes to stability, it should be first and foremost related to the principles and activities of the actors and laws is quite transient and transient matter. Well, if I got you right, the politics regarding equal treatment of all investors will be the same, and at the same time Alexis said that it's always up to decision makers, and we wrote down also an opportunity to defer the or to postpone the projects, to suspend projects that can change the economic situation in the region. Well, the colleagues offer 2 years for these measures. We would like businesses and the financial sector to hear us. We don't have a goal of proclaiming something what we will not be able to execute, and we want you to follow us closely as we develop the mechanism. We do not want to turn our regulation of our relations into something what regulates our desires. It will not work. So we urge you about the following: if we forget or ignore something or miss something, please pay our attention to it and ask for our response. And this is something Elena has started from. We would like to have this direct communication channel. We would like to hold this club of financial chief officers to be held on a regular basis. Roman, tell me please something what Alexa was talking about earlier. Let's say in the evening you get one thing, in the morning you get something else as an exchange. As a Minister of Finance, we are always interested in calculating or developing the comprehensive state support, and we would like to have ideally a registry that should be available to Federal Treasury and Federal Taxing Authority. And we are thankful to Roman that he agreed to work with his team in the national industrial sector, and we hope that this registry will be synchronized with a register that has a record on all support measures. And we would like the subsidies to extend to the term related to the measures the government states, and it should be aligned with the interest rate, and that all should be recorded in the registry. It should be transparent in terms of public access. We need to think about it, especially given into account the commercial confidential information and so on, and we are interested in developing it. And by the way, Mr. Medvedev tasked us to test a pilot project, and if our operating mechanism is efficient, and we will not give a start to a number of discussions, and we will work according to clear rules, then it will be used at a high scale. So I joined the other speakers. There's not much to say after your brilliant introduction. Our goal as a Treasury is to provide operating excellence when it comes to the policy of investments. Talking about the register that you have mentioned, at the federal level, we have around 600 billion rubles of subsidies at the state, at the federal level, and another trillion at the regional level. Well, When it comes to federal level, the system is transparent. When it comes to local level, tenders make it quite opaque, and we can compare it to the system of the federal procurements. And with subsidies, there are so many legislative acts that are not aligned to each other, and there are some working groups, commissions, different decision makers are engaged, and in terms of control, we can see that the procedures are immature. And as for Treasury support, we started opening accounts, and that was a forced measure. And we have a residual amount of 600 billion rubles, and this, we believe, is a proper mechanism that will help money to be used in a more efficient way. Sometimes when we allocated those resources into the bank system, earlier we saw a clash of interests. And the question to financial officers, if an interest rate for deposits is higher than the fine for non-following the rules, the financial officer will focus on the company's profits rather than fulfilling obligations. Well, for the financial director, it is natural. You cannot blame him for doing that. Well, for us as a treasury, it's important because we would like, we are committed to the result rather than the means of achieving results. Therefore, we had to introduce this mechanism, but there is an answer. Of course, we have to develop the treasury support, and we don't want the 600 billion rubles turn into 1,600 billion rubles in a year. So we need to think about co-financing, about following obligations on the part of the state, and we also need to make sure that the investor, the private investor, will invest proportionally to the state. So the doors are open, and we are ready to communicate to all of you and share with you information how you can use treasury tools to achieve the our goals. Yes, and there is a subject of discussion is providing treasury subsidy-based support. Yes, and we will compare it to the Institute of Federal Procurement, state procurements, and we will see how this measure will help us to increase the efficiency of investment projects and creating favorable conditions for the implementation. And it's important for us as a decision maker. Thank you very much. Does anyone have anything else to say? Alexei, you are the only person here who have technical expertise. You have the international team that is in charge of international investments. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, Andrei. From the very beginning, I would like to specify the following. The goal of our meeting is to invest per 1 ruble on the part of the state, 2.5 rubles. Or you put it even more gracefully, on the promise of the state, you invest 3 rubles. As for the business, under current circumstances, it has many definitions. Rostech is business, Yandex is also business, and Russian Railways is also business. And a startup with 5 people is also a business. But we understand that these are businesses of different nature. I will say 2 words about the subject I'm well versed in, and I'm not going to talk about some matters that surprised me in a pleasant way. Of course, infrastructure development is the objective of the government. Developing the northern region is the same thing. In May, we had the 251st decree, and the goal was to implement in new solutions in our high-tech companies, and this is a process that is co-financed by the state. But we forget about a very simple aspect. It's not about money per se, not about investments. If I do not need something, I do not need it, no matter whether it costs 50 or 100 rubles. And if you give me 50% discount, it doesn't matter because I don't need it anyway. I will give you a simple example. State company invited 8 startups that develop technologies in this sector. So he was listening to them. He was very interested. But then he said one thing. He said it to me. Well, you need to understand, why do I need it? I can substantiate my tariffs at Federal Anti-Monopoly Service anyway. So it all looks good. Everything what you talked about, it's good, but I need to understand whether I need the product, because I get everything what I need, I will get anyway. And it's not a matter of him being an old-timer or something. It is just the rule that he follows. So as for the decrees that I issue, they are issued based on an evident assumption that somebody needs that. But actually, Andrei, you need to question yourself whether people need it or not. And it is a large question. As for NLMK, they have a large R&D department. They hire professors and experts from abroad, and they understand that they need it. Alexander, I apologize for interrupting you. However, we heard the problem, whether somebody else needs it. One phrase, let me him finish. Yesterday there was a meeting at Yandex. The Forsenka was there and some other officials. So they announced of investing 5 billion rubles in the school education. Why? Is it a charitable project? No. And you see, they lack, they're short of personnel, and they understand that if they do not invest their money in the education, they will go down because they will not have a sufficient number of workers. So this is something what we can compare to what is going on in the public sector. Yes, and this is something to discuss. And the task voiced by Alexei regarding developing skilled personnel, something the task number 1. But let us think how we are going to stimulate large companies on the part of the state in order to offer technical improvement, and what can we offer within the large projects. And the support there is very significant, and we need to understand what we can expect from it, and hopefully demand will be formed not only due to localization or also, let us see whether we can look for the possibilities offered by R&D of our high-tech companies like Sibor, even Miratorg. Although in the agricultural sector it may be somewhat different. Anyway, this is not a scientific technical program. We are talking about investments as well, because colleagues started talking about it. Oh, was it you? Yes, somebody was talking about this. So as for national projects, they have to comply with the environmental and technical standards. And when we talk about investments, this is something what we miss. And we're not discussing it today. But why did I ask Alexander to raise this? Because this is an issue to be discussed next year. We need to develop our legislative base and regulations with our investors and projects in a way that it will increase trust, and then we will focus on scientific technical development of our frontline companies. Anything else to say at the end? I apologize for keeping you longer than expected. Well, club format implies that no. No, we had no whiskey or cigars. You even didn't offer us tea. We are definitely going to make up for it next time. Well, those who don't know each other exchange the business cards. Anything else to say? A question from the floor? No. Today it is a club format of chief financial officers. Anything else to say to be included in the protocol, and anything without which we should not finish our club's meeting? Getting back to the public support of infrastructure projects, anything new what has not been said yet? We were talking about subsidies or tax return. Think about cases when it would make sense to give advance payments for their costs. But what would be the guarantee? The company should guarantee the return of these funds within a certain period of time. What kind of mechanism will the company use? There should be a guarantee mechanism. Okay, we have heard you, but the request to you is the following. We were not able to find proper wording for it. We could not come up with a mechanism that will guarantee the return of advance payments and subsidies. If we are able to discover such a mechanism, we will support you in that. Otherwise, it will be a subsidy or direct expense of the budget. So this way we support this or the other investment project, and we either follow the standard existing procedures like tenders and so on. Well, are we going to wrap up? Our club thanks the guests that joined us, our investors, our shareholders, our financial experts from the bank sector. It was a very fruitful and exciting discussion. I apologize in front of those who were not able to say anything today, but I invite you for the next discussion. I'm not talking about the discussion that will happen next year, but I'm talking about the regular meetings held by the Agency of Strategic Initiatives. We have outlined the plan today, talking to the audience. Not everyone was able to make it till the end, but I would like to get back to what we started with, and the public or state policy is something what is implemented in our territory, in our regions, and we are focused on increasing economic growth, and financial experts see the big picture, and they understand what should be implemented and what output they can expect. So we are kindly ask you to give attention to our initiatives, and we invite you to join us, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.